Before the power, there was the boy. Before the headlines, there was the journey. This is Unwritten Verdict.
Muammar al-Gaddafi, commonly Gaddafi, rose from a poor Bedouin family in the Libyan desert to rule his country for over 42 years. Born around 1942 near the town of Sirte, he spent his childhood in a tent among the Kadadfa tribe, the son of Abu Menia, a goat and camel herder, and his wife Aisha. The family was largely illiterate and nomadic, keeping no written birth records, so even Gaddafi's exact birth date is uncertain. His father insisted that he get a formal education despite their poverty. Gaddafi accelerated through elementary school in Sirte, completing 6 grades in 4 years, and often slept in a local mosque while he studied at night. In 1956, he moved south to attend secondary school in the oasis town of Seba, Fezzan. There he became politically conscious and formed a close circle of young friends influenced by Pan-Arab nationalism. The charismatic Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt was a major inspiration. In 1961, Gaddafi was even expelled from school for pro-Nasserist activism. He went on to law studies at the University of Libya, graduating with high marks, and then joined the Royal Military Academy in Benghazi in 1963. After graduating in 1965, he and a few peers secretly organized into a revolutionary Free Officers Group aimed at overthrowing King Idris's monarchy. Gaddafi topped his class, spent 4 months for advanced officer training in Britain, and returned to Libya as a Signal Corps lieutenant in 1966. By 1969, Gaddafi and his fellow officers had carefully planned their move. On September 1, 1969, when King Idris was abroad in Greece for medical treatment, the conspirators staged a nearly bloodless coup. Within hours, the government had collapsed. The crown prince was placed under house arrest, the old constitution scrapped, and the Libyan Arab Republic proclaimed. Gaddafi himself was only 27 years old when he emerged as the new commander-in-chief. He famously refused to promote himself above the rank of colonel, stating that Libya's revolution meant he was ruled by the people and grand titles were unnecessary. He followed the example of Egypt's Nasser, who also remained a colonel after his own 1952 coup. Within days, the new regime shut US and British military bases in Libya and began consolidating control. Many Libyans initially welcomed the young officers as reformers who would end corruption and foreign domination. Almost immediately, Gaddafi set about reshaping Libya along pan-Arab and socialist lines. He closed down the last British and American bases in early 1970, demanded larger shares of oil revenue from foreign companies, replaced the Gregorian calendar with the Islamic one, and outlawed alcohol in line with Islamic morals. In 1970-1971, he expelled the remaining Italian settlers and virtually all Jews from Libya, framing it as part of an anti-imperialist struggle. By 1973, he had nationalized Libya's oil industry, channeling the profits into vast public works, housing projects, free healthcare, and education for Libyans. He was also adamant that Libya would support revolutionary causes abroad. Gaddafi dubbed his governing philosophy Islamic socialism, a mix of Arab nationalism, strict Islamic moral codes, and direct popular rule. In 1975-1979, he published his 3-volume Green Book, promoting direct democracy through local people's congresses and calling Western democracy and capitalism failures. In theory, Libya under Gaddafi had no political parties or parliament. Instead, every neighborhood was supposed to be governed by its basic People's Congress. In practice, however, Gaddafi retained firm personal control. He hand-picked a small inner circle of officers and relatives to run the government, while any dissent was crushed by his revolutionary committees. As one observer noted, the promised People's Committees often turned into instruments of patronage and repression. By 1977, Gaddafi even changed the official name of the country to the Great Socialist People's Libyan Arab Jamahiriya, often translated as State of the Masses, symbolizing his claim that Libya was governed by popular congresses. Yet he remained as strong a ruler as ever. In fact, after 1979, he relinquished even the nominal title of head of state, insisting only on being called the brotherly leader and guide of the revolution. Gaddafi cultivated a highly theatrical personal image to match his revolutionary ideology. He often appeared in public wearing flowing Bedouin robes, elaborate military uniforms, or wildly colorful outfits, earning him nicknames like the King of Kings of Africa. Wherever he went, he was accompanied by a corps of female bodyguards in high heels, an eccentric display that became one of his hallmarks. He even had a personal Bedouin tent set up whenever he traveled abroad to remind people of his desert roots. Behind the scenes, Gaddafi turned himself into the center of a personality cult. He granted himself grandiose honorifics: Guide of the 1st of September, Great Revolution of the Socialist People's Libyan Arab Jamahiriya, and Brotherly Leader and Guide of the Revolution, which were proclaimed in state media. When he spoke, it was treated as the law. Gaddafi's regime dabbled in theatrics to project unity. The reality was a highly centralized authoritarian state run for decades by him and his closest loyalists. Regional interventions and terrorism. From early on, Gaddafi sought to export his revolution. He pursued pan-Arab unity by force of rhetoric. In 1972, he and Egypt's Anwar Sadat and Syria's Hafez al-Assad proclaimed a federation of Arab republics, hoping to fuse their countries into a single Arab nation. This dream quickly faltered, and Gaddafi later even explored union deals with neighbors like Tunisia, which fell apart by the late 1970s. In the meantime, he embroiled Libya in several military conflicts. In 1977 and 1979, clashes with Egypt along the Libya-Egypt border nearly erupted into full-scale war. In the late 1970s, his forces intervened in Chad's civil war. His regime also sent troops to Lebanon and other hotspots. Outside conventional warfare, Gaddafi gained infamy for supporting militant groups worldwide. He portrayed himself as an anti-colonial patron, giving arms, money, or training to armed movements. Libyan arms found their way to anti-apartheid guerrillas in South Africa and Namibia, to Palestinian militant cells, and to revolutionaries in Africa and Asia. He even backed secular radicals like the US Black Panthers and the Irish Republican Army. In return, Libya was widely held responsible for sponsoring violent attacks on civilians. For example, a bomb planted on Pan Am Flight 103 exploded over Lockerbie, Scotland in December 1988, killing 270 people, including 11 people on the ground. British investigators later identified two Libyan intelligence officers, Abdelbasset al-Megrahi and Lamine Khalifa Fima, as the prime suspects. When Gaddafi refused to extradite them in 1991, the UN imposed oil and financial sanctions on Libya. A similar attack followed in September 1989 when a bomb ripped apart UTA Flight 772 over Niger, killing 170 people. Again, Libyan agents were implicated. Libya denied involvement, but the international community blamed Gaddafi's regime for these and other plots. Gaddafi's rhetoric and support for militant anti-Western causes led to a nadir in relations with the US and Europe. In 1984, Libyan intelligence was accused of involvement in the murder of policewoman Yvonne Fletcher during a protest outside the Libyan embassy in London. Britain severed diplomatic ties with Libya as a result. In April 1986, US President Ronald Reagan ordered airstrikes on Tripoli and Benghazi, targeting suspected terrorist facilities, and even Gaddafi's own compound, his adopted daughter, was killed. The United Kingdom also bombed a Libyan plane over international waters in December 1986. By the late 1980s, dozens of Western and Arab countries had broken or downgraded ties. The image of Gaddafi as a mad dog of the Middle East became entrenched in Western media. international isolation and realignments. Through the 1990s, the Lockerbie and UTA bombings kept Libya under heavy sanctions. In 1992, the UN embargo cut off most Libyan oil revenues and commerce. Gaddafi responded by doubling down on an anti-Western stance. He publicly confessed to supporting some underground groups, but he also sought new alliances. In 1996, Libya helped overthrow Chad's dictator and gained a friendly government there. He shifted more of his focus toward Africa. Frustrated by Arab governments' refusal to challenge sanctions, Gaddafi repudiated Pan-Arabism by the late 1990s and became a leading proponent of Pan-African unity. Libya initiated projects like the Great Man-Made River, a massive desert irrigation scheme, did boost the economy, but ordinary Libyans felt little relief from sanctions and inflation. By the late 1990s, some Western countries quietly began to reconsider Libya. In 1997, Libyan officials handed over the Lockerbie suspects to be tried by a Scottish court in the Netherlands, and soon after, the UN and US eased sanctions. In October 1999, Nelson Mandela visited Tripoli and praised Gaddafi's anti-apartheid contributions, even awarding him South Africa's Order of Good Hope. Within weeks, he consented to extradite the two suspects under UN pressure. The trial, overseen by Mandela, resulted in one acquittal and one conviction. In the eyes of the West, this cleared the path to normalization, rapprochement, and late rule. In 2003, Gaddafi made a historic reversal. He announced that Libya would eliminate its weapons of mass destruction programs. After years of fruitless outreach, he agreed to allow inspections and to dismantle Libya's chemical, biological, and nascent nuclear efforts. In December 2003, Libyan officials formally began rolling back their WMD projects under international supervision. In the same period, Gaddafi accepted responsibility in principle for the Lockerbie bombing, apologized to the victims' families, and arranged multi-million-dollar compensation funds, though he continued to deny he personally ordered the attack. As a result, the US and UK removed Libya from their terrorism sponsor lists. Prime Minister Tony Blair, UK, and other European leaders held meetings with Gaddafi, heralding a new good neighbor chapter. By mid-2000s, Libyan oil production and GDP had rebounded, and Gaddafi briefly portrayed himself as a statesman of moderation. In his later years, Gaddafi shifted his grand ambitions toward Africa. At global summits, he spoke of a United States of Africa and bankrolled Pan-African projects. In 2004, he convened an alternative African Union Summit in Libya. His biggest triumph came in 2009. He was named chair of the African Union 2009-2010 and was honored by a council of tribal elders as the King of Kings of Africa. This ceremony, with Gaddafi swathed in leopard skins and robes, epitomized his desire for grandeur. Under the banner of African unity, Libya hosted hundreds of investment summits and cultural exchanges. At home, Gaddafi touted these moves as historic victories. Libya's desert tents now stood among the halls of African power. Yet the streets of Tripoli saw little of this wealth. Critics noted that big new buildings and fountains existed mostly for show, while basic services lagged. Meanwhile, Gaddafi's personal image remained a spectacle. At European Union Africa meetings, he introduced himself with titles like Guide of the Great Revolution and insisted on opulence and protocol that many considered eccentric. The 2011 uprising and Gaddafi's end. Despite occasional gestures of conciliation, deep currents of discontent remained. In early 2011, inspired by uprisings in Tunisia and Egypt, Libyans took to the streets. Protests in Benghazi and elsewhere demanded political reform and an end to corruption. Gaddafi initially denounced the demonstrators as Islamic militants and unleashed brutal force against them. However, the revolt spread rapidly, and by August 2011, the National Transitional Council, NTC, the rebel government, had driven Gaddafi's forces out of Tripoli. NATO had intervened in March 2011 to enforce a UN mandate for a no-fly zone, turning much of the war's tide against Gaddafi's military. Muammar Gaddafi went into hiding. On October 20, 2011, he was cornered in his hometown of Sirte by NTC fighters. In the final moments, he was captured and killed by rebel forces. His death, on videotape and still debated in its details, marked the violent end of an era. Libya's four-decade experiment with Gaddafi's Jamahiriya government was over. Legacy and controversy. Gaddafi remains one of the most polarizing figures of the late 20th century. His supporters point out that under his rule, Libya grew from one of Africa's poorest nations into one with comparatively high literacy rates, free education and healthcare, and modern infrastructure, all funded by oil revenue. They highlight that he championed anti-imperialism, backed the liberation struggle in South Africa, and, unlike many dictators, kept a form of free medical care and women's rights in place. In 1997, Nelson Mandela even described Libya's contributions to ending apartheid as extraordinary and honored Gaddafi on the world stage. Gaddafi also redirected Libya's prestige toward Africa, winning praise from some African leaders for elevating their concerns in global forums. On the other hand, critics remember Gaddafi as a tyrant. They cite his decades-long suppression of dissent, arbitrary arrests, and a network of secret police that spread fear. Human rights groups documented torture, disappearances, and executions of Gaddafi's opponents both inside Libya and abroad. Families of rebels and ordinary citizens still recount vanished relatives and blacklisted careers. Internationally, Gaddafi financed violence and brutality, from Lockerbie to African civil wars, that left deep scars. His personality cult, complete with endless newsreels of him leading speeches, even glistening with diamonds in his beard, often overshadowed any claim to democracy. From a modern perspective, Gaddafi's life story is a study in contradictions. He was a Bedouin revolutionary who became a world leader. He spoke of freedom and equality while ruling with an iron fist. He challenged Western hegemony but later begged for its acceptance. As one biographer puts it, his tenure was dominated by a pervasive cult of personality. Today's Libya is still haunted by that legacy. Some Libyans look back nostalgically to the stability of the Gaddafi era, while others see only the rubble of his authoritarian rule. In sum, the tale of Muammar al-Gaddafi is as rich and turbulent as the desert that shaped him. From his unpretentious tent in Sirte to the summit halls of Europe and Africa, his life was thoroughly documented by journalists, scholars, and now this narrative. Every statement here is backed by historical records and reliable accounts. The hope is that this cinematic retelling, complete with facts and citations, helps readers understand the full, complex story of a man who was unlike anyone else on the world stage.
This is Unwritten Verdict.